So the exposome is the totality of risk factors that humans are exposed to in their environments, and it can range from the hundreds of thousands of pollutions and toxins in our environment that have significantly taken over our day-to-day or are prevalent in day-to-day activities because of their industrialization over the many years. And they can range from plastic exposure all the way to unseen volatile chemicals in our atmosphere, all the way to sound and light related pollution. So the biggest category exposomes that have garnered a lot of attention in research and recently media are the chemicals that we acquire from food intake. And these have so many different chemical structures, from plastics and microplastics all the way to many other chemicals that are called endocrine disrupting chemicals because they mimic the structures of various hormones in the body, and they can activate or inactivate various hormones from testosterone to estrogen and so on. And that can, as you can imagine, lead to significant downstream effects on the body because the body is getting a load of these sort of hormone signaling molecules.
Welcome back to Biohacking Eve, Health Optimization for Women with Judith Miller, where we shine a light on everything that will help you reach your best self as a woman, as unique and individual as only you can be. Live long and prosper, my friend. Welcome back, everyone. Today we have Dr. Fady Shmouni with us. Hi, Fady. So Fady is a physician scientist who is pioneering the future of personalized health. Trained in endocrinology, internal medicine, and genetics, he bridges cutting-edge research with real-world application, helping people understand how their environment, their hormones, and their biology shape long-term well-being. What makes his work especially relevant for us is how he looks at the invisible factors that influence women's health on a cellular level. Today, we're diving deep into the exposome, the rise of autoimmune issues in women, and how digital twins and multi-omics are shaping the future of female longevity. Fady, let's start from the ground up. Most people think of toxins as isolated chemicals, could be mercury, could be pesticides, but the exposome is actually much more than that. So what's the scientific definitions and what systems does it affect over time?
Yeah, thanks. Good to be with you here. So the exposome is the totality of risk factors that humans are exposed to in their environments, and it can range from the hundreds of thousands of pollutions and toxins in our environment that have significantly taken over our day-to-day or are prevalent in day-to-day activities because of their industrialization over the many years. And they can range from plastic exposure all the way to unseen volatile chemicals in our atmosphere, all the way to sound and light related pollution and many others that directly impact our physiology. And today we can quantify some of them using sensors and detectors and testing of some endocrine disrupting chemicals. But there's so many that we just don't have access to testing for. So they are probably the most important and the greatest risk to our health span and lifespan and longevity. And understanding their exposure risk and their influence on our overall physiology and well-being will be extremely important in shaping how we build communities, live in healthy spaces, and then integrate that information with all the other biomarkers that we have access to so we can be more predictive with our health.
So it seems to affect rather every system in the body, and it seems to come from many different places. So if we can maybe break it down into the 5-6 pillars with real world examples, just to tell us where are we actually exposed, especially in the ones that we don't know about.
Yeah, so the biggest category exposomes that have garnered a lot of attention in research and recently media are the chemicals that we acquire from food intake. And these have so many different chemical structures, from plastics and microplastics all the way to many other chemicals that are called endocrine disrupting chemicals because they mimic the structures of various hormones in the body, and they can activate or inactivate various hormones from testosterone to estrogen and so on. And that can, as you can imagine, lead to significant downstream effects on the body because the body is getting a load of these sort of hormone signaling molecules. And we get those from primarily the food we eat, whether they're the pesticides that are unwashed from the vegetables that we eat, all the way to the food that is stored in containers of plastics or other chemicals. Perfect example is water that we take from a plastic bottle, especially plastic bottles that are exposed to light. And that leads to deleterious chemical reactions and increased number of unknown chemicals that we then ingest, get absorbed, and cause so many negative effects on the body, including leaky gut and hormone disruption and so on. So food is the biggest source, whether it's food at home or food from eating outside the house. The second category is everything else we have at home, whether it's the light system, the external sound pollution, the internal sound pollution, the electromagnetic waves that permeate our walls and enter our home, and that cause a direct impact on us. And then the furniture that we sit on that have so much chemicals that then can get onto our skin and get absorbed and so on. And so like the totality of all this exposure from food and air quality and light and sound and it's called exposome, which are the exposures that we have or that we accumulate over our lifetime. And remember, we spend over 2/3 of our lifetime in closed spaces. So 2/3 of our lifetime exposures in closed spaces will likely come from these negative aspects that can impact our health. And so understanding these risk factors from our immediate surrounding can be extremely helpful in delineating the totality of our risk factors that then impacts our health. Most likely negatively today, but there are so many interesting solutions that we have access to that can mitigate that risk. And it starts with understanding your home and your home environment.
And it's things like we talked about the furniture, for example. People will think, what's on the furniture? You've got, again, plastics, depending on what it is. You have paint, you have flame retardants. So the things that are actually meant to protect you from, say, burning your house down are actually killing you slowly over time, or at least intoxicating in many ways. And clothing, we've touched on. So there's this whole argument of synthetic clothing versus natural. So, for example, sweating in plastic fibers, so wearing yoga pants, etc. We also have a fragrance and dyes in the things in the laundry detergent, for example. And something we'll touch on later is the whole personal and beauty products. So makeup, cosmetics, perfumes, and we'll come back to that. Actually, one question I had, blue light at night is something that comes up frequently, I think, in many research papers, podcasts, etc., etc. That we're aware of, but how about LED lighting?
Yeah, lighting is critical for our circadian rhythm and pattern. And we humans and mammals alike have this ability to regulate our physiology through various internal and external mechanisms, and light being one of those variables that impact our physiology, including hormone secretion and any disruption of light, whether it's the nighttime shift worker or different light coloring in your household environment, excessive light, or even excessive light exposure before bedtime and whatnot can impact that circadian rhythm and cause disruption. So understanding light frequency, the colors, understanding the circadian lighting pattern can help optimize your physiology. And it may help impact eye health and sleep quality and obviously the hormonal secretion. And having a normalized circadian pattern can also help optimize your metabolic, skin, and overall aging mechanisms. Now, in terms of which light is good or not, I don't think we fully understand that. At a minimum, understand the different ultraviolet and various frequencies that are out there. Understand, what UVA, UVB is. UVA is bad for aging, A for aging, UVB is bad for just anything from skin cancer to other risk factors. Understand the importance of light exposure on skin health. And one of the most important mitigators here is to apply sunscreen, and also understand the other light frequencies and exposures, including LED and their impact on your overall health. I think where to start is to understand what wavelength of lights exist and from different sources like sunlight, which is the natural source, LEDs, which are used in phones and tablets and TVs and computer screens, and obviously the street lights and all the lights around us and their impact on our health, and whether we can optimize them in our internal environment to minimize their risk on our overall health, which, as mentioned, can stem from sleep quality all the way to hormonal and metabolic health. So at a minimum, try to replicate the body's physiology, which is seeing a lot of sun during the day and dipping that circadian lighting throughout the night. And I think we need to mimic that natural light exposure in our environment so we could become more optimized. And there are companies that specialize in creating these sort of circadian lighting atmospheres at home to contribute towards someone's human optimization.
And I find the topic of lighting so interesting. So with LED, there's the argument that they are essentially flickering as opposed to incandescent light, which is either on or off, but it's not constantly on or on and off not at the same time, but alternating very quickly. And apparently that's stressing our mitochondria, which has a downstream effect on energy production. A dimmable light as well, while we might think, look, the light intensity goes up or down, actually it's just that the on and off switch is happening even faster. So apparently they're even more stressing for our mitochondria. And regarding sunscreen, this is actually an interesting one because it's so difficult to find one that isn't toxic. The sort of home research that I've had back in the days is basically stick zinc oxide paste in your face, which makes you look like a ghost, so not very sexy. Anything else pretty much seemed to be toxic. I think in Australia, they're a little bit further on their formulations. Any insights on that?
Yeah, I think try to use chemical-based sunscreen, try to understand, as discussed, the different wavelengths, and UVA, bad for aging, UVB, B for burns. Try to apply sunscreen before leaving the house, if possible, on a consistent basis. And it is one of the most important strategies for mitigating skin aging. In addition to skin hydration and getting a skin examination on a yearly basis to ensure that someone doesn't have these sort of risks for cancer developments for skin health. And it's relatively a cheap product to acquire and apply and has probably the best return on investment for skin health. Now, to go back to the light exposures, there's a whole field of what we call photobiomodulation, which is low-level light therapy. And right now, people can buy different machines and equipments that will expose them to red and red light products that have some interesting effects on someone's physiology. And these wavelengths, whether it's light, whether it's red light or near infrared, have an LED or low power laser delivery mechanism. And they tend to improve skin health and overall internal health through impact on optimizing the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. Now, we're seeing this big push in the biohacking and longevity movement of using these red light therapies, whether it's in the context of a retail store or home wellness solutions. And I think the evidence is interesting, and the evidence of its impact on different systems in the body, including brain health, skin, immunity, depending on the wavelength and the duration of red light exposure. But I think we need better data. And the good thing is that it's accessible to the consumer today. Now, it doesn't mean that every product that you find on Amazon or Alibaba with LED red light therapy or infrared is good for you. I'm aware of different red light masks and different products out there that claim these positive, exposome related effects on the body. But I would caution the consumer, do your due diligence on a lot of these products, and also use them cautiously, because there have been, conversely, negative impacts of people using these products, which can include a product malfunction that leads to skin burn and so on. So yes, LED infrared has good health benefits, but let's see what the future holds in terms of research.
So let's stick with exposome management. So on one hand, we mention measuring it. On the other hand, we mention mitigating it. So let's start with measuring for now. What sort of tools are actually available?
Yeah, so at home, you can incorporate so many interesting detection tools, from carbon dioxide sensors to electromagnetic field shields that block electromagnetic field energy entering the home, to circadian lighting, to sound systems, to comfortable bed sensors that will measure your quality of sleep and different biometrics, all the way to wearables and smart mirrors that understand your physiology and alert you in the event of anything concerning. We also have testing kits for saliva and urine, and now even prick dry blood tests for microplastics and various endocrine disrupting chemicals that you could use to help quantify your exposure of exposomes. And in terms of the food we eat, and how to clean the food and what source of food is best and healthiest, there's a lot of different information out there about how to minimize exposures to these endocrine disruptors from food. And then in terms of which appliance to purchase that can minimize exposure, try to avoid anything with plastic as much as possible. And I think if someone were to change one bad behavior towards a good behavior, is to avoid purchasing water in plastic bottles. I think that's the easiest thing to do today. Try to purchase water in a glass or buy a water filter system. And there's so many that are readily available today in the market, cost effective, to help minimize exposure of these microplastics, which are very abundant in our exposure. The key pillars are analyze your environment, analyze, monitor, and then offer these mitigation and reduction strategies to minimize your exposure as much as possible, and track your data using testing, whether it's in clinic or at home, to understand your baseline and to understand the impact of your mitigation strategy on these different environmental toxin exposures.
And regarding the test kits that you mentioned, is there anything you can recommend? Obviously, you're based in Dubai, in Canada, we're based here in Europe, etc.
There's so many companies that offer different products. I just came across a company that does, microplastics and PFAS analysis through a dry blood sample. And there are others that do quantitative analysis using a spot urine or a 24-hour urine analysis. There are others that are more cumbersome and require a blood sample. But yeah, there's different companies offering different products. And I'm not aware of anyone doing it as a direct-to-consumer at-home testing at the moment, but there are many clinics out there in different jurisdictions that offer these tests. And the tests can be broken down into sort of two main categories: the basic toxin analysis test, which are your mercuries and other heavy metals, and then the advanced toxin analysis, which includes the mycotoxins, which are the fungal toxins, and then the other environmental toxins like the microplastics and phthalates and so on. You want to make sure that you order both your heavy metal toxin exposure, your mycotoxins, like your fungals, and then your extended toxin analysis from understanding your microplastic exposure and so on.
Interesting. So are there any exposures that women tend to overlook? We've talked about yoga leggings, we've talked about mattress foam. I think scented candles apparently is a hidden trait as well. Is there anything else that's either overlooked or maybe that is actually marketed as clean and natural, but actually has a harmful effect on our hormones?
Yeah, definitely makeup. And surprisingly, women ingest a lot of makeup, especially from lipsticks, into their gastrointestinal tract over their lifetime. And so make sure you pick a makeup line that's healthy, that meets your standards, your healthy standards. And I would start there. In terms of all the other exposures, air pollution, light, sleep, heavy metals, even microbiome, like the air composition of different microorganisms, are more or less the same. But yeah, I would start with makeup and obviously the fashion, leggings and bras and so on, and really understand the various chemicals used in those and their impact on skin health and beyond.
So for the average consumer that is educated but not necessarily in that particular space, what is the easiest way to go about that?
What you could do in terms of action, independent of gender, is at a minimum, understand your air pollution risk and wear a mask. For example, the other day here in Toronto, Toronto's air pollution was the second highest in the world. You want to understand that. You can understand that by reading the news or having a CO2 sensor, and it will tell you your exposure risk. And you can mitigate that through wearing a mask or avoiding going outside at a minimum, or changing route or using a car rather than walking and so on.
So that's for those things that you notice. I think air quality is something that we easily notice. But for example, when I'm buying yoga pants, I know by now not to use plastic and ideally should be cotton, apart from the fact that they're super ugly. What is the middle ground? How do you as a consumer know what has how much impact, and how do you make an active choice? Because I think most people are not going to move to the forest and live in cotton pants for the rest of their life.
Yeah, it starts with understanding the basic risks of using a lot of these fashions that pose risks. So education is very important. And then mitigating that through creating an action plan where you will not buy certain brands or certain products because of their impact on your health. And I think once someone is in that position to make a lifestyle choice, then there are a lot of healthy brands out there that they could use to help them through risk mitigation. And cotton is a good example, but there's so many others, polyester clothing and tight-fitting clothing and so on. And listen, this is not perfect science. You can come across disrupting chemicals all the time. But understanding the basics, whether it's from air pollution to light to microbiome to clothing, and trying to minimize risk of exposure as much as possible. And it starts with creating simple habits, like the water example, like the clothing example, like the air example. And I think that's a good start. But you don't want to also overhaul your life upside down and to try to minimize exposure to zero, because that won't be possible. The reality is we've got chemicals in our environment and many unknown chemicals in our environment that we're not aware of. And the best thing to do is, one, to understand they exist, two, to develop a mitigation strategy, and three, to test and track. And if you do that today, we're going to have a lot of interesting technologies that come our way in the near future that will help us sort of become better stewards for our healthy exposomes.
Are there any sources of education that you can recommend? For example, for food, the US publishes a list of the dirty dozen. So that's the 12 most toxic foods that you really should be buying organic. And then there's the clean 15 where you don't have to bother. Are there equivalents for other areas?
Yeah, a lot of the government sites have lists of these exposomes and ways to mitigate them. I think ChatGPT is great as well at recommending different mitigation strategies and how to avoid certain exposomes. And obviously, there are great scientific publications by top researchers. Just a couple of months ago in Washington, D.C., the Exposome Moonshot Initiative was launched, which is really meant to bring experts from all over the world to agree on the definition of exposomes and what next, right? Like, how do we study this? How do we incorporate it into the sort of bigger realm of research, and how to create universal recommendations for stakeholders, individuals, and so on. And I think we're very close at agreeing in creating sort of an international consensus on this important subject. And I think the consumers are going to be empowered with unified data very soon that will help them with risk mitigation.
Fingers crossed on that. So just coming back to makeup and cosmetics, which I think to my audience is probably a topic that's dear to their heart. You've mentioned lipstick when we talk about body lotion, for example, something you apply all over. If that is toxic, you're literally smearing it all over the largest organ that you have. And I believe the topical absorption rate is something of 70 to 80%. So you're literally absorbing 70, 80% of all the whatever things might be in there. Let's talk about the effects on women specifically. Obviously, we have a rather complex hormonal system. That's just talking about the sex hormones, but we're talking thyroid issues, we're talking early menopause, we're talking PCOS, etc. What is the link? How do you go from putting on the wrong body lotion to having PCOS?
Great question. And makeup is an important exposome factor. And there are different categories of endocrine disrupting exposures that come with makeup. The first and most common are the endocrine disruptors, like the parabens, phthalates, triclosan. And what they do is they get absorbed through the skin into our bloodstream, and they cause hormone imbalance, including infertility, including obviously polycystic ovary syndrome, androgenic effect on the body, like increasing hair growth and impacting menstrual cycle frequency and disruption and so on. And they do that because they are endocrine disruptors. They mimic the structural effect of some of our hormones like testosterone, estrogens, and so on. And they go and they sit on that receptor and activate that receptor, the estrogen receptor, the testosterone receptor, the androgen receptor. And that mimics the physiology or the pathophysiology of disease like polycystic ovary, infertility, and so on. And you've got other categories like heavy metals, like lead and cadmium and mercury, which are found in lipstick and eye products that women can swallow over their lifetime because of the topical application of these heavy metals on their lips. And that can cause significant gastrointestinal side effect, from leaky gut to autoimmune disease, all the way to these heavy metals getting, whether through skin or through the gastrointestinal tract, and cause neurotoxicity and an organ burden. And then you've got the preservatives like the formaldehyde, the BHA, the BHT, that cause skin irritation, and they're possibly carcinogenic as well. That can cause, fetal malformations or early fetal exposures to these chemicals that can then disrupt fetal development and or cause miscarriage. And then you've got the volatile compounds from fragrances that can cause allergies and respiratory tract issues. And of course, the forever chemicals like the microplastics found in water-proof mascaras and the water bottles, and they can cause so many disruptors. We talked about hormone imbalances and infertility, including thyroid hormone issues. And some brushes have talc, which is associated with asbestos risk. And again, that can cause carcinogenic effect, increased risk of cancer, amongst many other environmental toxins that are available in makeup that we're not aware of. So some of that can come from packaging, like plastic packaging. Some of that can come from the actual chemicals in the makeup, and or a combination of both. And there's an expiry issue or a fungal related exposure in the makeup, so mycotoxins. Then you get the mycotoxin burden, which can also cause neurotoxicity and multi-organ burden on the individual. So it's a very important, serious, yet complicated topic of makeup as an exposome factor. But I think that it is a public health emergency, right? Because of how widespread this problem is globally.
And the other thing is accumulation, right? So if someone had the same exposure from day 0 to 1, say 50 years ago, they will be starting day 1. We're probably already born into this. So we've literally been accumulating it in the womb all the way up to now. Is there, and obviously depends on the chemical, but is there a way of point of no return? Is there a point where the body simply can't recover and the system just collapses?
I think so. I think the body's notorious at healing. I think it's never late to heal and to get optimized and to start all over. Yes, risk is cumulative over time, but so is healing and reversal. And there's so many strategies for implementing today to become healthier, right? So start with your ingredient literacy, understand what the ingredients are, be a minimalist when it comes to makeup, choose clean cosmetics, and be aware of shelf life awareness and avoid this fragrances, sprays, mists as much as possible. And we're entering this era of regenerative cosmetics or regenerative cosmeceuticals. So we're going to see an evolution of cosmetics from blindly using these endocrine disrupting chemicals to more of a regenerative medicine conscious product line that will have a greater impact on overall health. So by regenerative cosmeceuticals, the use of regenerative products like peptides, and peptides will positively mimic our endogenous hormones rather than the endocrine disrupting chemicals that impact our endogenous hormone balance negatively. And then you've got the exosomes and the various other growth factors that stem from the juice of the stem cells. And I think we're going to see, and we're already seeing, that shift from non-specific cosmeceuticals to regenerative cosmeceuticals to even personalized cosmeceuticals through secretomes, which are products that are produced from someone's own derived stem cells to create skincare and makeup line products. So the future of cosmetics is personalized and is regenerative. And I think that is very exciting for one, creating healthier product lines, and two, to create these safer strategies for the individual so they can get less exposure to these chemicals.
Okay, that's very interesting. So we'll see what comes out of the labs. And my next question, for example, was going to be, when you try to detox, and obviously detox is a very fashionable word, but let's take it as reducing your toxic burden of the body. Is it a case of try to stop intoxication through your exposome as much as possible and then just quote unquote let the body do its work? Or do you actually have to actively support in detoxification?
Yeah, great question. So start with the strategies I outlined: ingredient literacy, be a minimalist, choose clean products, be aware of the shelf life, avoid sprays, and choose more personalized, regenerative-based products. And then test for your exposome burden through these various testing kits, and then intervene through either chelating therapies or even now therapeutic plasma exchange, which is an change through dialysis that tends to remove a lot of the burden of toxin elements in the blood. Yet we need more data on their impact on endocrine disrupting chemical removal. But I think that's the sort of best strategy we have today in terms of intervening more holistically. And while therapeutic plasma exchange is expensive, each session ranges from $5,000 to $10,000 a pop. You need about 4 to 8 sessions a year for you to see the impact it may have on your, say, biological age and toxin removal.
So are there any ways to get rid of forever chemicals like the microplastics, for example, that are A, feasible, and B, ideally also affordable?
Yeah, start with removing all plastics from your environment, including water bottles. So
That's the input. So on the things that we already have on our body, 30-something years of accumulation in my case, what do I do about that?
yeah, get tested. And if your levels are elevated, then I would recommend a therapeutic plasma exchange at a minimum.
Okay, so then the hope is that down the line this will get more affordable to make it more accessible to the rest of the public. Okay, fantastic.
Absolutely.
We've touched on autoimmune disorders, and I believe you've previously called autoimmunity in women a biological mismatch. Can you actually talk us through the stats and why I believe 80% of autoimmune sufferers are women?
Yeah, and we don't fully understand this, and we think that it's related to the X chromosome, but we know that autoimmune disease impacts women more than men. Certainly in my field of endocrinology, which is the study of hormones and peptides, most endocrine disease are more impacted in women. And the prevalence of autoimmune disease in women is 2 to 10 times more likely than in men. And the age onset is frequently during the reproductive years, so say 15 to 45. We also know that autoimmune disease improves during pregnancy. And we see this with many autoimmune diseases, including thyroid and multiple sclerosis and so on. And it tends to go through a rage post-pregnancy. One of the reasons for that is that pregnancy is likely a mitigating factor for autoimmunity to allow for fetal development and healthy pregnancy. And the estimated risk is about 1 in 9 women will develop an autoimmune condition in their lifetime. And some examples of autoimmune conditions, as mentioned, including Hashimoto's, thyroid disease, which is autoimmune disease of thyroid, SLE, lupus, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis. And a lot of these autoimmune diseases tend to be multisystemic. So they're activation of your immune system that triggers a war in your body that then fights your own cells. And some of these can be organ specific, like thyroid and Hashimoto's, or multisystemic, like rheumatoid arthritis, where a lot of different cells from a lot of different organs can get impacted. And oftentimes, when someone goes through an autoimmune flare, they will need systemic treatments, whether they're steroids or other autoimmune drugs that have their own issues. We also know that environmental toxins like microplastics and others can activate an autoimmune response. And this is typically more common in individuals with genetic susceptibility. So understanding your genetic susceptibility to autoimmune disease through genetic testing can be an interesting sort of preventative, proactive, preemptive approach to understanding someone's risk.
Actually, let's talk about the epigenetic switches while we're on the topic. So what is the link between the exposome and how does it interact with genes and epigenetics?
Yeah, so epigenetics is the study of the area of the DNA that is highly impacted by environmental exposures. And it's the area of the DNA that helps turn on or off the rest of the DNA, the genes in the DNA. So it's the gatekeeper of the DNA. And this gatekeeper gets disrupted by so many factors, including our lifestyles and exposomic exposure. And we know that if we follow a sedentary lifestyle, we can have a negative epigenetic or epigenetic markers, and that could lead to what we're calling now in the field of longevity medicine age clocks or biological age clocks. So we can measure the impact that an intervention or lifestyle or even exposomes have on the body through studying and understanding this region of the DNA, which is called the epigenome, and then creating an output, a score, which is called a biological age. And then we can follow this biological age or this epigenetic score over time to understand the impact of the intervention, for example, avoiding microplastics and exercising and eating healthy, and its impact on this epigenetic score. So the field of epigenetic testing is growing exponentially, and there are a lot of consumer products out there that will help test for epigenetic age, and we can use it as a biomarker to help us in analyzing someone's epigenetic risk. And in terms of the other question of the exposures, risk to epigenetic changes, and ultimately autoimmunity and so on, we know that things like cosmetics, personal care products, microbiome altering factors like antibiotics, stress, whether it's psychosocial or caregiving roles, and infections like EBV, CMV, HIV, whatever it is, will trigger molecular changes and hormonal stressors in the body that will then alter these epigenetic programming changes, and that will lead to, let's call it accelerated aging and or evolution of autoimmune disease.
And how do you know as a consumer that the exposome is an issue for you genetically, in the sense that are there any telltale signs?
No, I think exposomes are universally, like the ones we've mentioned, are universally bad, independent of someone's genome or genetic risks. But there might be more genetic or genes that will increase susceptibility to a greater impact, a greater negative impact on the exposome than others, whether they're circadian genes or metabolism related genes or autoimmune related genes. And I think we need more research and understanding the intricate role and connections between the exposomes and the genome and the epigenome. But I think these sort of the exposomic risk factors are incredibly powerful in increasing risk to disease. And they're also incredibly powerful at even turning on and off certain genes that will lead to certain issues in the body, including autoimmune risk. And they will likely do that through epigenetic risk and reprogramming. Example, you ingest microplastics or these cosmetics that have heavy metals, and that heavy metal will have an impact on this gatekeeper of the DNA, the epigenome, which will then turn on bad genes in the body that will then expose to cancer risk. That's more or less cascade that can happen in the context of the influence of exposome on epigenetics.
Super interesting. And again, it's very individual, right? You might be more protected genetically against some factors, but more vulnerable to others. Coming back to autoimmune disorders and the hormone immune link. So are there any early signs that a woman might be developing autoimmune dysfunction that conventional doctors miss? And again, there's so many of these, right?
Yeah, because autoimmune diseases impact a lot of cells in the body, the clinical manifestations can be quite broad. And it may start from showing early signs of skin issues like dryness and brittle nails, all the way to hormonal imbalances, acne, many different skin rashes. In the context of thyroid, obviously, whether it's cognitive slowing, memory issues, constipation, skin dryness, low heart rate, constipation. And in the context of a broader systemic autoimmune disease like lupus and whatnot, you'd come across so many different systemic findings. But I would say any deviation from someone's norm, like your normal day-to-day habits, should trigger a sort of a healthcare provider's visit, more or less.
Okay.
Unless explained by something, right? If you're stressed and you're not feeling well and you had poor sleep that night, that it might be understandable. But if it's a persistent change in your baseline and the way you feel, and if that persistent change is growing, then that should trigger a healthcare visit to study any potential underlying issue, including an autoimmune disorder.
And I think the added layer of complexity with women is our baseline is different every single week. So you're not comparing how did I feel last week, so how did I compare to feeling this time last month. As an endocrinologist, you're actually one of the few men I think you have a clue about the female cycle. But coming back to the immune system, so why does the immune system fluctuate across the cycle? And how can this then become a liability in the face of chronic environmental stresses?
Yeah, a great question. And I think one of the most important factors in understanding the fluctuation is our hormonal factors, right? So we know that estrogen enhances immune responsiveness, right? Increase the risk of hyperactive immune response. We know that there are hormonal shifts that can trigger onset or flare of immunity. And that includes the hormonal shifts that we see with pregnancy and postpartum and menopause and even oral contraceptives or hormone replacement therapy. And we also know that progesterone and androgens have immunosuppressive, so protective effects, right? And so I think that dance between the estrogens and the progesterones and the androgens and the shifts that happen between, and of course, cortisol and the shifts that happen between these different hormones can certainly impact, one, the prevalence of autoimmune disease in women, and two, the protectiveness of some of these conditions like pregnancy on autoimmune disease, and then the increased risk of autoimmune disease in the postpartum period and or during stressful events. And obviously, it's an interplay between, hormonal factors, genetic susceptibility factors, like the X chromosome I mentioned earlier. Women have two X chromosomes, and they typically inactivate the second chromosome, right? But some women have what we call mosaic X inactivation, and that may increase exposure of different sort of antigens of that extra X to the body, and that may trigger an autoimmune response, as it's a theoretical genetic susceptibility. We'll also have different immune system differences, right? We've got stronger innate and adaptive immune response, and they are more likely to experience increased autoantibody formation because of a more heightened immune response that they've probably developed over, the evolutionary years. And obviously the exposomic triggers that may be different in women than men, including makeup exposure, that may also add to the overall risk burden of disease development, including autoimmune disease. So yes, women are more impacted of autoimmune disease, likely because of the culmination of all these factors and many more that we don't understand.
That's both in the nature and the nurture. Let's have a look at peptides. So hormones are signaling molecules in the body. Then what are peptides and how are they different?
Yeah, they're both signaling molecules. Peptides, as defined by the FDA, are signaling molecules that are less than, say, 42 amino acid chains. And proteins are more than 42 amino acid chains. And hormones can be either large or small structures. And peptides are sort of small signaling molecules. There are over 300,000 different types of peptides released in the body, with insulin being the first peptide that has been very well detailed at the University of Toronto in the early 1920s. And now we've got a plethora of different peptides that we know and understand, and also a group of peptides that are now commercially available for the consumer to help optimize their endogenous signaling systems, including peptide levels, from growth hormones to the GLP-1s for weight loss, all the way to recovery peptides like BPC-157 and TB-500. And consumers are using these peptides to help optimize their signaling mechanisms that tend to decline after our 30s, likely also as a sort of adverse effects from all these exposomic exposures, which again can cause endocrine or peptide disruptions in the body, so peptide disrupting chemicals. And I think consumers today have, the ability to try some of these peptides to mitigate the risk of peptide disrupting chemicals on the body, and or to increase their recovery and mechanisms in the body so they feel better and reduce the burden of disease. I've personally tried different peptides. I've seen a significant improvement in my overall physiology, recovery, sleep. And I think we're going to learn more and more about their overall utility in the management of an optimized health span and longevity.
And which ones are the ones that you like to use in clinical practice, and or which ones do you think are the most relevant for women?
Yeah, so we've had, and some are, FDA and Health Canada approved, like growth hormone analogs, obviously the weight loss therapies like GLP-1 receptor agonist, which initially were marketed for diabetes and weight loss, and now we're seeing signals of their possible use for enhancing health span and longevity, whether it's through microdosing or other strategies. And then the recovery peptides and the slew of so many other peptides are not regulated, they're not approved, but there's real value in their use from the hundreds of thousands of people that are using them, and the results that we're seeing and the impact it's having on the sort of optimizing them, whether it's from a recovery, sleep, or even increased sexual performance and overall health optimization. So yes, there are risks for using them, just like any risk involved with hormone replacement therapy. So we tend to use them for a short period of time in cycles. My favorites are the recovery peptides and the growth hormones. So the recovery peptides being the BPC-157, the TB-500. The copper peptide is excellent for skin and hair, whether it's the subcutaneous copper peptide, which comes in a blue vial or pen, that helps with elastin and collagen production and incredible results on skin, all the way to even microneedling copper peptides into the skin. And what we're seeing right now as we discussed earlier, the regenerative cosmeceutical potential of these peptides, including copper and many other polypeptides, that they have on skin and hair health rejuvenation. And so it's, consumers today can pick and choose, and they can inject these different peptides serially or concomitantly, so they can get that multi-system effect. And they're relatively cheap. Just make sure you source it from the right healthcare provider and compounding pharmacy that's approved by the regulator to compound, rather than a research use only product. Because there are a lot of these direct to consumer websites that offer research use only vials. And one of the things you want to avoid is sourcing your peptide from the wrong sort of source or dealer, because the last thing you want is to have exposomes, like impurities, and heavy metals like lead and mercury in those vials. So when you source it from a reliable source, they're typically vetted by a third-party lab, tested, and you get a certificate of analysis that will ensure the product is safe, it's pure, and that it's really has those active ingredients as written on the vial. Because we've heard of very horrible stories of miscalculated vial concentrations, all the way to, heavy metals being the active ingredients, all the way to, their fake claims in the industry. So I think consumers need to be protected, and that's why we're going to see a lot of regulatory changes in regenerative medicine, from stem cells to peptides, especially in the United States, which is very exciting. Florida just passed the stem cell law, and now physicians can administer stem cells for orthopedic, wound, and pain-related use cases, and that includes the exosomes and the peptides and other regenerative molecules as well. So I think the future is very interesting when it comes to these molecules. And we finally have something that is cost-effective, can work very well, and that can create a huge impact on the individual.
And this is very insightful. One question on that is regarding dosage, because we've seen historically that dosages for, I think 8 out of the top 10 selling medications across the board were actually misdosed for women, either because they just gave pound for pound, or they didn't adjust for weight, or women actually had different reactions to whatever the medications were. Do you think that's going to be an issue with the peptides?
Yeah, I think today it's an issue because the user experience is horrible, right? You get it in lyophilized powdered vials, and you're going to have to reconstitute with bacteriostatic water. So choosing between a 2 cc or a 3 cc bacteriostatic water in the vial can make a huge difference in understanding how much you're going to pull in that syringe and injecting. And you may miscalculate the dose. You may give yourself a higher dose than the intended dose. And who wants to self-inject every day? And now, which protocol to use? Is it the 3-month protocol? Are you using 5 peptides at the same time? Or are you using sequential therapies? So yeah, there's the UX UI in this field is not that great. It's all over the place. There's no standardization. Most things are not regulated. And we don't have good science in the literature on their long-term impact. But we're seeing some interesting companies solving for these issues. Like we're starting seeing peptide pre-filled pens come to market, right? That's going to help solve the issue of the user experience and the miscalculations in dosages. We're seeing branded peptides coming from reliable compounding labs. We're seeing the regulator move in the right direction, and we're seeing more consumer adoption, and physician actually use appropriate training channels and like real world experience. And the accumulation of all of this will only make us move in the right direction.
Fantastic. So let's take another direction. Let's have a chat about digital twins and multi-omics. So you're at the forefront of a shift towards digital twins and medicine. And for our audience, what on earth is a digital twin, and how's it different from a typical lab report or diagnostics snapshot?
Yeah. forever we were relying on a snapshot of our biomarkers by going to the lab, getting our limited biomarkers, receiving results in a PDF file with a reference range, and then the abnormal result typically flagged in red. Yeah, and that's really old archaic medicine. Today, we have the ability to understand our physiology better by analyzing biological data from different sources in the body, including studying our genetics, epigenetics, biological age, our 20,000 plus genes from a single salivary sample. We can understand our microbiome composition from a single stool sample. We can really dig deep into our blood biomarkers and understand an expanded set of biomarkers, including early dementia or dementia-related biomarkers we could order to can be predicted of future risk dementia. And obviously incorporating other data layers like the wearable data, the imaging data, exposomic data into an operating system that has been trained on various predictive models that will read all of these layers of data. We call them omics, and the multiple layer is referred to as multi-omics. So a multi-layer data, multi-omic approach using AI and predictive analytics to generate an output from the unification of all this data. And that output can be extremely powerful in understanding someone's risks for disease, their wellness state, and that output can also help recommend the best interventions, which includes lifestyle, food, supplements. And we could also use that output for diagnostic reasons as well. Now, putting all that data, that multi-omic data and the output into or digitizing all of that data can create a replica of your biology in the digital world. And that replica of your biology in the digital world can be referred to as your digital twin, which is your clone, your companion that understands your data, that talks to you, that continuously analyzes your risks, your wearable data, and can connect with data sets out there to recommend you on how to live a healthy life. And that continuous dialogue between your data from the different multi-omic sources, the predictive algorithms, your health companion that sits in your pocket through an application is the future of medicine. It's precision medicine. It's leveraging big data, AI, predictive analytics, digital twin technology to really create a replica of you in the digital world. And then you could do so much from there, right? You could then send this digital biology to clinical appointments. You could task this companion of yours with different tasks. And that digital companion can also continue to monitor you for health risks and help you get more and more optimized. The future is personalized through all these tools. And today we have the ability to leverage platforms that offer these important rails of the new personalized medicine economy.
Do you have any examples of where a multi-omics approach, so genetics, epigenetics, blood, urine, stool, wearables, God knows what, has revealed something that a single marker testing would not show, or has changed the treatment plan in any way?
Yeah, I can give you many examples from the use of these multi-omic digital twin strategies in my clinical practice and many others that have identified biomarkers that helps inform clinical decisions. And I can give you a simple example of a client that came for blood testing to have an elevated homocysteine level, which is one of the markers of cardiovascular health. This Multi-Omics strategy, we simultaneously analyzed the genome, which revealed an MTHFR mutation, which is a mutation involved in the methylation pathway, B12 and homocysteine and folate. And this individual had concomitant blood reduction in folate and B12. So the trifecta of elevated homocysteine, low folate, low B12, MTHFR mutation. The system, through analysis of multi-omics, gave me recommendations on what to prescribe for supplements, lifestyle, and flagged these abnormalities to give me a reason, a physiologic or a pathologic reason of what's going on in this individual's health system, all integrated in a beautiful dashboard that will help my practice get more optimized and help me deliver care in a more holistic and multi-omic way. If I didn't have the multi-omic approach and system in place, or the operating system, my care would have been very fragmented. It would have relied on biological data from different sources. It would have relied on me analyzing PDFs of results from different sources, would have come back different turnaround times, and I would have likely missed it as a busy practitioner that may not have had the training or the time to put these different pieces of the puzzle together. Automating, streamlining, and bringing a multi-omic approach to personalized care delivery will really revolutionize the way we see and treat medical disorders today.
And timing is critical, right? When we think about just how few resources we have in most healthcare systems. I think the average GP has something like 6 minutes to see people. So this is going to be something that helps us pick up on these things. For our audience, how might a digital twin evolve for a woman, say, in her 30s, who wants to track longevity biomarkers for the next 20 years?
Yeah, the digital twin technology is going to get so good at connecting with your smart home technologies, like your wearables at home, your sleep sensors, your air purifiers, the wearables that you wear, your big biologic multi-omic data, your notes, the doctor's notes, your feedback, your conversations, and will constantly analyze all that data, compare it to the literature, and create predictive models for your short-term and future risk. And I think the initial intent, or at least the behavioral change that we want to see from having such data and output, is to create a positive behavioral feedback loop in someone's life. And if we can help create awareness through these predictive models, so someone can implement positive change, like the positive change we discussed related to exposomes, right, from cosmetics and so on, I think that will have a huge impact on someone's immediate and long-term health. Now, we will get to a point where these technologies, including digital twins, will likely alert us of an impending doom before it happens. Like this massive data analysis will likely allow the digital twin to be so good at predicting disease, like predicting a heart attack hours before it happens, or predicting cancer, right, by analyzing imaging and different biomarkers, cancer biomarkers like cell-free DNA markers and so on, years before it happens. Or also analyzing someone's social behavior, right, that can mitigate relationship impact or impact on relationships. Like in saying something at the wrong time. Will this digital twin help calm you down in the event of a stressor so you can make better choices and executive decisions that will have such a positive compounding environment and relationships. And I think having something like that can be extremely powerful for the individual, for productivity, and for contributing to the field of health span and longevity by being a very good and healthy companion to the individual.
I think this psychosocial element is so interesting because that's something that's very often forgotten, right? When we're all talking not pins and needles, but more needles, as it were. Okay, very interesting. Yeah. What will it actually take to democratize this technology so it's not just for biohackers and billionaires?
Yeah, adoption, right, by the healthcare community, including the wellness community, not just the sort of traditional infrastructure. Cost of testing has to significantly drop. We've seen the Moore's law with genetic testing, right? From $1 billion a genome in 2000 all the way to less than $100 a genome, and we're probably going to see $10 a genome in the very near future. And imagine if we can do the same with like all the other multi-omic testing out there, where it will be so cost effective to create a multi-omic digital twin for everybody, right? And it will become standard of care. And I think that we're going to see this in the next 5 years.
To the future. Actually, looking back, what is one belief you had 10 years ago about women's health or longevity that you've completely changed your mind about?
I think the exposomes and the exposures that we're constantly bombarded with have become a very important topic for me to read about, understand, and incorporate in my clinical practice, including the educational seminars that I give. We now have the tools and the research that links the deleterious effects of these exposomes on health and the testing kits and the different mitigation strategies that we mentioned. So we feel we're more empowered today than ever to go out there and educate the public on these issues. And like, I'm also very happy to see that the regulators moving in the right direction as well, whether it's the CDC, Health Canada, FDA. There's just this general awareness of the public health emergency that we're facing today with these environmental toxins. Before, I remember 10 years ago, it was just a single paragraph chapter about just FYI, these chemicals exist in the environment and they may cause endocrine disruption, but we never really had the real science to back these claims and to help us create these guidelines. Now, the study of exposomes dates back decades. People have written about exposomes for decades, but there were really no actionable insights or major regulatory shifts until now, which is very exciting.
So while we're waiting for the regulator to catch up, if you could install 3 habits into every woman's day, something that costs little but makes a massive physiological difference, what would it be?
Remove plastic bottles of water from your life. Even when you go to a restaurant, ask for a glass bottle instead of a plastic bottle or a water from a faucet. 2, educate yourself about exposomes, understand what they are, understand your exposomic risks at home, start with your makeup, do a full due diligence on your makeup and other things that you're surrounded with. And 3, measure your hormones. Many individuals have hormone disruptions, especially around perimenopause. I think everyone should get their basic hormonal panels checked on a yearly basis and get hormone replacement therapy if needed, especially in the menopause period. I think we're at a stage right now where most of us feel comfortable with hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah, I've been having some very interesting discussions around that. Okay, so let's move on to our closing curveball question. So just give me the ones that you can. Number 1, what are the 3 things that you wish your colleagues and or clients would know that you believe would really move the needle in your field?
Multi-omics and multi-omic testing and creating predictive models through multi-omics to help us in delivering personalized medicine.
Cool. Next one. If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say and why?
Measure your hormones.
Very to the
Now,
point. Okay, so next one. What is a book or books you've given the most as a gift and why? Or alternatively, what are the 3 books that have greatly influenced your life and why?
is it gifts?
Either books you've given as gifts or books that have basically the things that have really other people's thoughts that have really shaped your thinking.
Yeah, I think Peter Attia's Outlives has created an important movement in shifting focus from traditional medicine towards more personalized, proactive, longevity focused medicine. And while I don't agree with all of the insights in the book, I think that it helps the consumer and the healthcare practitioner in getting activated into this beautiful field of wellness and longevity. And so I would start there.
Okay, what are the other 2 that have shaped your life the most?
My academic books, like my endocrine books, I've co-authored a book on endocrine disrupting chemicals. I have an upcoming issue that I'm working on endocrine disrupting chemicals. I think the medical literature has a lot of interesting insights. And while a lot of research is non-reproducible, non-generalizable, has flaws, we could still learn from a lot of these evidence-based publications to really understand how to build better research and ask the right questions down the road.
Okay. Next one. What purchase of $100 or less has most positively impacted your life in the last, say, 2 to 3 years, i.e., recent memory?
Oh, that's a tough one. I know with inflation, everything is above $100, but
I'll make it 200.
yeah, I would say creatine monohydrate. It's a relatively cost-effective supplement to take. I work out every day. I do resistance training, and I see a major impact on my muscle development and cognition and memory and health and energy with creatine. I take 5 grams a day. The other sort of cost purchase for human optimization would be peptides. So the recovery peptide can help me recover after going to the gym, which helped me push myself further with weightlifting. And I don't miss a day because I feel great. I recover quickly on these peptides and tend to be very cost effective as well. So creatine and peptides, I would say, are a really good under $100 strategy for human optimization.
Okay. And the same question for $1,000 or less?
I would do wearables at that price point. iPhone, Apple Health wearable, maybe a CO2 sensor, which is also something you can get relatively priced on Amazon, like a CO2 sensor. You'd be surprised how an elevated CO2 in an environment, especially with many people, in a closed environment with many people, whether it's a car or an office, can have an impact on someone's energy and cognition. So understanding your CO2 makes you feel a little at home, and then carrying your CO2 monitor with you wherever you go, especially in closed spaces, to understand the variation of CO2 over time. And for example, one mitigation that someone can do if they're in a meeting, a closed office meeting with several individuals at high, to open the door or take a break, outside the office. And that can make a huge difference on someone's sleepiness, energy, focus, and so on. And most of us don't do that. But we're constantly exposed by high CO2 levels that impact us. For example, of air pollution exposomes on our hour by hour variability. And whether it's in a bus, public transportation, office work, closed spaces, I think that is something that is overlooked.
Okay. Any particular brand of CO2 monitor, or they're quite simple?
No, quite simple. To monitor on Amazon can be as informative.
Okay.
The Dyson air purifier that has 2 sensors as well. So that can be used in office or gym space as well.
Okay. Fantastic. So, what is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made? And this could be an investment of money, time, energy, etc.
I think in my education, right, I've spent many years studying medicine and subspecializing in internal medicine, genetics, and endocrinology, and has really shaped my understanding and interest in the field of human optimization.
We can tell. What is an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love?
I've obviously become better at sleeping, good quality sleeping, thanks to all the wearable data and the health celebrity influencers, social media that are helping push the agenda of becoming a healthier you. I've started implementing a lot of these strategies and no significant improvement of how I feel the next day with going to bed at the same time every day, having quality sleep with less interruption. I'm still guilty of getting light exposure before bed or drink or having stimulants within that 4 hour time window, like caffeine. But it doesn't have to be perfect as long as you change one bad habit. So I used to be a night shift worker working in the hospital. So I've dropped that, and that had a major positive impact on my health.
I
And
can imagine.
we know that circadian disruption, whether it's from night shift workers or travel or poor sleep or whatever it is, can have a significant impact on mortality, cancer risk, overall performance the next day, and so on. Optimizing circadian rhythm and testing for circadian rhythm, including the salivary cortisol testing kits, can significantly help inform the consumer of how to live healthier.
Anything you can recommend there, brand wise?
So I'm the medical director of LE Health. So this is cost-effective cortisol testing strips from saliva. And you can do this serially on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to use cortisol as a surrogate of understanding your circadian rhythm. And cortisol is an important stress hormone. A disrupted cortisol rhythm reflects a disrupted circadian rhythm, and an elevated cortisol at all times may indicate, stress and or cortisol related disorders like elevated cortisol from an adrenal tumor known as Cushing's syndrome, and detecting cortisol disruptions early and optimizing cortisol related disturbances through lifestyle changes and so on can significantly help someone's overall health and well-being. And this is a perfect example of at-home testing strategy for circadian rhythm and cortisol optimization.
You mentioned stress and cortisol. It's not just stress that we typically think about your boss is calling and you haven't got the deliverable ready. It could be anything from low-level chronic stressors. Again, we're coming back to the exposome, but it could also be a fungal infection, for example, that just keeps stressing your system on a very low level. You're still functioning. You don't even know your baseline is impacted because that's the only baseline. Next question. Who would be your perfect sidekick in your work? This could be past or present, real or imagined. And I have a feeling you're going to say everyone should have a digital twin.
You answered my question.
Fair enough.
I think AI companions, and we're going to have multiple AI companions for various use cases, are going to be your best bud. But I think at this phase of my life, which is the phase of venture building and investing in startups, I really enjoy working with very capable, smart, ambitious founder. And I think empowering that founder to create great things ahead, including product services in the health and wellness space, is the biggest reward that I can ask for today.
And I think that in a way answers my next and final question is, what are you working on at the moment? i.e., what is the next exciting breakthrough that you can see coming?
Gamifying wellness through the intersect of blockchain, tokenization, and all the biomarkers that we discussed. So how can we reward individuals from seeking good habits and testing.
Thank you for joining me on this transformative journey. Your presence in this community is truly valued. Now, you may not realize it, but your words hold immense power. They have the ability to reach others who may benefit greatly from the wisdom shared here. If you found value in what you heard, I kindly ask you to take a moment to subscribe to Biohacking Eve, leave a glowing review on your preferred podcast platform, and share Biohacking Eve with your friends and family. Your support helps spread the message of health optimization for women far and wide. Lastly, I want to express my gratitude to you for investing in yourself. By prioritizing your well-being, you serve as an inspiration to others. I'm eagerly looking forward to bringing you many more exciting episodes, and thank you for being a vital part of our community. Live long and prosper, my friend. The Biohacking Eve Health Optimization for Women podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be substituted for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of the healthcare professionals for any such conditions. In addition, the information on this podcast does not constitute investment or financial advice.
Their biomarkers frequently with blockchain tokenomics. And we're very close to launching a product to market that will help define wellness through Web3.
Fantastic. Fady Shmouni, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, it's a pleasure. Bye-bye.